Welcome back to my Lightroom tutorial series. If this is the first time you're seeing one of these videos, there are a couple of other ones that I've done already, and I've put the links at the bottom of this blog post for you to go and visit if you need to. I started this tutorial series to take the edge off Lightroom and photo editing a little bit, and to try and make it a little bit more accessible, and just to show you exactly what the power of Lightroom is, and how with very small changes you can actually make a pretty large effect on your photos. In this video, I wanted to explore one of my favorite parts of Lightroom, and that's the adjustment brush tool. If you have spent any time editing with me in the studio, in the Creative Hub, or you've watched one of my first tutorials about the basic flow, you'll know that I defer to the brush tool more often than not. And the reason I love using the brush tool is because it gives you so much freedom to apply global editing principles like white balance, color temperature, burning, dodging, adding sharpness, or saturating or desaturating your color, but to a local area within your photo. This is great because it allows you to think creatively about how you want to process your image and how you want to mold the story of the image using the global principles of editing. What I find more and more as I edit photographs is that I end up dissecting the shot into light and dark shades, colors, shapes, and textures. And if you start to look at your photo in a clinical way such as this, it makes it really easy to decide what effect you want to apply, and more importantly, where you want to apply it. And this is exactly where the adjustment brush comes in. The adjustment brush is found in the Develop module on the right-hand side of your screen, top right corner. And you'll see this little magic wand looking icon. That's where you'll find the adjustment brush. The easiest way to understand this tool and how it works is to think of using an actual paintbrush with bristles that vary in size and strength, and with the ability to dab on more or less paint or the effects that you choose as you go. The panel that you see on the right hand side here, when you click on the adjustment brush, this panel that opens up is basically your palette of effects. Think of it as a palette of paint colors. It's the palette of effects that you can choose from to actually paint onto your image. When you close this panel, you'll see that the slider now says amount at the top. This is quite literally the amount of the effect that you're painting on. And as you go, you'll get more and more creative with what you brush on and what you mix together from the palette that you have at your disposal. The first thing to understand about the brush tool is the size of the brush. So if you have a look over here, you can increase or decrease the size using this toggle, and you'll see that that brush gets bigger or smaller as you go. So there's smaller, bigger. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to use the left and right bracket key on your keyboard. So left makes it smaller, right makes it bigger. Or you can just quite simply use the scroller on your mouse. Scrolling up will make it bigger, scrolling down will make it smaller. And that's a much more accurate way to use the size adjustment for the brush. The next most important thing to understand about the adjustment brush and the way that it works are two things called feather and flow, and you'll see them right underneath the size toggle here. And if I click over here just to illustrate how feather and flow works, I'm going to just set up something so that you can see it on the screen. So just make this a blue color. And first of all, the size of brush, which I showed you just now, is making it bigger and smaller. So by making it small, you can do a very thin, fine line, slightly bigger, and then bigger still, where you've got a really broad brush stroke. That's size. The next thing is feather, and feather is the relative softness or hardness of the bristles. So if I make my feather very hard, you'll see that the two circles here are closing in towards each other, and what that means is that the effect is stopping fading out from the middle towards the edges, and it's going to be a pretty hard line. So you'll see the difference here. Hard edges, and if I bring the feather up again all the way to the right, you'll see the edges are much softer. So imagine this one as being a very hard bristled paintbrush, and this one being a much more softer bristled paintbrush. And then the third aspect of it is flow. So again, underneath feather, you're just going to move this toggle to the left, and you'll see here that the flow, so the amount of the effect that you're painting on is basically the flow. So here you see I am painting, I'm pressing down on the mouse, but it's taking me a long time to get anything to start to register on the page. There you go, you start to see a little bit there. So I'm going over and over again. So in essence, I'm only dabbing on a very small amount of the effect at any one time. As I bring the flow up towards the right hand side, you'll see it's going to take me much less effort to get anything onto the page. The next most important thing to know about the brush tool is the use of the mask overlay, and you'll see it down here at the bottom of the screen where it says show selected mask overlay. You can also do that by pressing O on your keyboard, and you turn that on. And this is much more useful when it comes to when you're brushing on effects that are very difficult to see on the screen. So if we just do clarity, for instance, or sharpness, let's do sharpness. You're not going to see that on a black screen here. So I'm painting onto the screen. You can see the brush moving. My flow is right up there, so it's not a case of not brushing any of the effect on. But you can't really see where I've brushed. If I click this box at the bottom, it's going to show you a red mask or a red overlay. And that just shows you exactly where you're painting on your image, and it allows you to be very accurate, and also just to see if you've missed any spots where you're meant to be painting. What's also important to know about the mask overlay is that it shows you where you've brushed, but it also shows you where you've maybe gone over the edge of a line or overshot the mark somehow, and you can easily remove any brush stroke that you've added. So in the center of the brush, you'll see that there's a little plus sign. By holding the Alt key, it turns it into a minus sign, and with this, that turns it into an eraser. So you can then erase whatever it is that you don't want of your brush stroke. So if I wanted to remove the edges like this, very easy to do so. Just keep in mind that as with when you add the effect on, you've got feather and flow to take into account. When you use the erase brush, you've got the same thing to consider. So you could take the feather down and have a much harder eraser, or you could take the flow down and erase very gently on an area that you want to be a bit more subtle with. So you can see very, very slowly coming off there at the edge there. So during your brushing onto your image, there'll be times when you've done multiple different layers of different effects. And here I've just showed you a couple of different layers so that you can see that after each time you click onto new brush and you adjust on a new layer, it's going to leave behind one of these little grey pins. You can see if I hover over it, it's going to go red just to show the mask. Same thing with that one. And you'll see that none of them are actually black. If I click on this one, and it turns black, it goes from grey to black. That means that that layer is active again, so that brush stroke is active. You can then go and adjust that or readjust whatever you need to adjust. You can take down the amount, you can change whatever it is you need to change, and you can basically go and reformat whatever it is that you've painted. So if I wanted to move on to this one, for instance, I'm going to click on that, it's going to turn black, and then that's the one that I'm actually now affecting. So it's pretty easy to keep tabs on how many different layers you've created, and which ones you want to go and readjust or adjust or remove from. The other important thing to know about these pins is that if you want to intensify any effect that you've painted on, and you don't want to necessarily have to go and repaint that same layer, you can just right click on one of the pins and press duplicate, and it's going to intensify that over and over again. And you can do that to your heart's content, and you can see we're just going over and over that same area. Right click, duplicate, and it's going to keep on going. Same thing over here, right click, duplicate, and it's going to keep intensifying. If you want to delete one of these pins, again right click, delete, and then it disappears. So very easy to keep tabs on what's happening with your pins there. Now that I've gone through the more technical side of how to use the brush, I wanted to take you through some of my favorite techniques on how I use the brush and adjustment brush through my editing. And one of my favorite things to do, and I explained this in one of my previous tutorials, is to burn and dodge, and that means to darken or lighten certain areas of the photograph. So with this male lion, I want to make sure that he's the most prominent thing on the page or on the photograph, and I'm going to just burn a little bit around him. So I'm just going to click over here on the brush, open up my panel. I'm going to reset everything, make sure everything is back to normal, just by double clicking on these toggles here. Takes everything back to where it needs to be. And I'm actually going to collapse this panel here. So I'm going to go back to the collapsed version where it just says amount. And I'm going to drop this menu down, and here you'll see the kind of typographical versions of what you see in the other panel. And I'm going to click all the way down here to burn. And you'll see if I click the panel open again, under exposure, it's gone a third of a stop of underexposure. So clicking that back closed again. And I'm going to just brush a little bit. I'm going to turn on my mask. So either by clicking this little tab at the bottom, or I'm going to press O on my keyboard. And I'm just going to brush all the way around this male lion's head, overlapping a little bit. You want this effect to be quite subtle and blended, so you don't want it to be a very hard line. I'm using 100% feather, 100% flow. I want to just erase some of this, so I'm holding down Alt on my keyboard, and I'm just going to buff away a little bit of what I don't want. See, it's not really doing much because my flow is all the way down, so I'm going to bring that up and bring the feather up as well. I'm just going to buff off some of the stuff that I don't want. There we go. That's looking good. I'm going to add a little bit more on this side. I want it to be blended. Press O again on my keyboard. And now I'm going to take this back to center. So I'm going to show you where we were in terms of brightness around this male line. And then I'm going to start to gradually and in small increments bring down the amount of this. So you'll see that everything that we've brushed is now turning darker and darker. If I bring this back up again just to show you where I would leave it, I would take it down a very, very small amount. Clicking this little light switch toggle is going to show you the before and the after. So there you can see a very subtle difference, but what it's actually doing is making that male line stand out a little bit more on the page. So I'm going to click over to this photograph, and instead of doing what I did with the previous photograph of the line, I'm now actually going to dodge or lighten. So again, under Effect, drop down menu, I'm going to choose Dodge, Lighten, and you'll see here it's a quarter of a stop of exposure. I'm going to do my same thing here. I'm going to press O on the keyboard, and it'll show you your mask overlay, so that red indication of where you're brushing. And I'm just going to brush gently over this leopard's rosettes. I want them to be a little brighter, and just bring him out a little bit more. So brushing generally over the whole thing, but just being careful here. So Alt again on the keyboard is going to turn this into an eraser. Just erasing some of the sections around the very edges that we don't need. Take my mask overlay off, and then you'll see now I'm just affecting that section that I've just brushed on. So I just want to gently overexpose a little bit. And again, using this little light switch toggle, you'll see before and after that may be a little bit much. So I'm going to take it down slightly, just bringing up that exposure a little bit more. And then you can pick up the spots that you've missed, or you want to maybe do a little bit more of. So maybe up on this ear section. And you'll see if you slightly overlap, you start to draw this kind of halo around your subject, which makes it look very processed or over processed. So that's when I say either blend in the burn or blend away the dodge on the outside. So remove that a little bit towards the inside of your subject so that it doesn't look like that there's this halo effect all the way around. So just holding down Alt on the keyboard and removing what you don't need. The next great part of the adjustment brush is actually bringing out clarity and textures. So in the beginning of the video I said that's one of the great global concepts that you can apply to a small area, and it's also part of dissecting your photograph and deciding that you've got a beautiful section of texture in this tree or this log here. You may have some different texture in the cheetah's fur, and you may have some different textures and colors and light and dark shades in the background. So what I'm going to do here with this log, with this cheetah shot, again under Effect, I'm going to choose something different. I'm going to go up to Sharpness, and in addition to Sharpness, I'm going to open up this panel and I'm going to add to the mixture of what I want to paint on. So I'm going to bring Sharpness up to the right hand side, and I want to bring quite a lot of clarity up as well. So I'm mixing those two together, clarity and sharpness. Collapsing this panel down again, O on my keyboard, and here you'll see I'm just going to paint all the way along this log. And I want to make this more prominent and bring a little bit more interest to what's there already. So just quickly painting over this whole thing. And with this, with sharpness, clarity, those sorts of effects that you can't really see. It's not a huge problem if you overlap a little bit like I've done here. So you'll see here, now under my overall amount slider, I'm going to slide it right to the left, which is none of the amount on. And as I slide this up to the right hand side, you'll see that that tree stump or that log is getting much more defined, and the detail and the texture of that is coming up on the screen quite a lot more. So that's after, before. Really, really nice tool in the adjustment brush. Similarly with this shot, of this little woodland kingfisher. We're hearing them all over the place at the moment out on Londolozi. And I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm not going to choose clarity here. I'm going to choose sharpness only. So again, opening up my panel, you'll see clarity here has not been selected, but sharpness has gone all the way up. Collapse that down again, put my overlay on, and again, I'm just going to brush onto this little bird and just kind of getting all the areas that I want to become much sharper. Bird photography for me is all about sharpness and clarity. So now you'll see as I move the slider left, you're actually blurring out the details quite a lot. And as I move the slider up to the right hand side, you'll see that we're getting quite a lot sharper there. So if I zoom in here, you'll see the effects of that. So this is zoomed in 4:1, and as I take the slider down, less sharp, and as I take the slider up, it's getting more and more sharp. And if we zoom back out again, you'll see that it has a nice effect. Nice and sharp. So before and after. Adding to that on this shot, I'm going to click New Brush, and I'm going to go with a little bit of exposure. So you could go dodging again like I did before, or you could adjust the exposure as you need to. You'll see here my other pin, so that's my sharpness pin, and if I hover over that, you can see where the sharpness has been brushed on. I'm on a new brush now, and you can see it's actually going really, really dark, because now I've taken the exposure all the way down to the left, which is not what I want. From there, you can actually bring this up to a point where you're just brightening up the bird, and just bringing a little bit more attention of the eye to the bird. So again, if I hover over this little pin, you'll see exactly where I've brushed. I'm going to keep that overlay on, just remove what I don't need along the edges. And you can see here how you can be really, really accurate with what you're brushing on. Take that off. H on your keyboard is going to hide those pins away, so you can remove that distraction and look at your shot just as it is. And again, just by clicking that little toggle on and off, you can see the effects that you're having. New brush again. I'm going to do a little bit of clarity on this tree stump. It's so beautiful. Making sure that my clarity is up to where I need it. And this time I'm not going to use an overlay. I'm going to do it just by eye. And you'll see there's quite a lot of detail that's coming up on this tree stump, which is really nice. Then the last thing, new brush again. I just want to get this face a little bit brighter. And what I've done here is I've gone on to dodge or lighten, and I'm just going to do one or two sort of targeted, almost spotlight shots, just on this little guy's face. And you'll see that's all the brushes off and all the brushes on, and we've just really targeted certain areas of the photo that you want to bring out. If I move on to this next one, we do the same thing that we did with the kingfisher. I'm going to go onto clarity. I'm going to add to my palette, drop this menu down. I'm going to bring sharpness all the way up as well. And this little family of elephant that we saw walking around this morning, just ambling along, I just want to bring out their beautiful tactile skin. So again, collapsing this and just brushing over where I want to affect. So I'm going to do it by eye mostly. You can see as I move this up and down, you can see the effect that it's having there. Just bringing out that sharpness. And you'll see that to the naked eye, there's not much of a difference there. But it's a very subtle and small amount of difference here. So let's bring that up there. And you'll see there's quite a big difference that we've now brought up in the clarity. Same thing as I did with the lion. I'm going to burn a little bit on the front here. Just take the attention away from what's happening on the ground and move our eye up to the three elephants that are walking across the shot. So just painting around where there's very bright section in the front and just removing the attention from that brightness. Moving on to this one, one of my next favorite parts of the adjustment brush is actually the iris enhance tool. And for this I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So in my navigation panel I'm going to go see how 8:1 fares. It's maybe a little bit too much. Let's go to 4:1. And again I'm going to click on my adjustment brush, top right hand corner, drop down on my menu, and I'm going to choose iris enhance here. And what that is if I open up the panel, you can see that it's going to be a mixture of a few things. It's quite a lot of saturation, a little bit of clarity, and a little bit of exposure, which I'm going to bring up slightly more. So here, what you're going to do again, you can put your overlay on, and I'm just going to brush just the eyes. That's all I'm going to affect here. I want to just bring a little bit of life back to these eyes, and bring a little bit of sparkle and magic back to them. So you'll see that's very creepy looking cheetah. If we take the overlay off, and now you slide the amount slider all the way to the top, all the way to the left, you can see how it's really affecting and bringing brightness and life back to those eyes. So if I zoom in a little bit more, you'll be able to see exactly how much we're doing here. So you don't want this to be overly kind of crazy looking. You want to just bring a little bit of extra shine and polish to those eyes. Then I'm going to click on new brush again, and I'm going to go down to dodge and lighten. I'm going to zoom in quite a lot more, and I actually want to pick up this line. You can see there's this line here of reflection, and that's represented by lighter pixels. And if I just click this dodge brush all the way across those pixels, what we're going to start to do is actually increase that reflection in the eye. So I'm just clicking individually across there. I'm going to zoom back out again. And you'll see here that that's before and that's after, and you've just created a little bit of extra sparkle in the eye. Bearing in mind I haven't done any of my other adjustments, my global adjustments. I haven't increased any exposure or decreased exposure, I haven't added contrast. So this is purely just showing you the adjustment brush capabilities. So if I move on to one of my last examples, and another one of my favorite parts of the brush, and that is adding clarity and also changing the kind of color makeup of slightly dull water. And at Londolozi and with wildlife photography, you're often photographing animals in and around water, and it can be a very interesting part of your photograph. So what I want to do here, this photo of the hippo, you can see that it's a really interesting, beautiful, warm color on the hippo, but the water is a little bit dull. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually go bring up my menu again. I'm going to click on temperature, and what I'm going to add to temperature, just going to bring the coolness down slightly. I'm going to add 100% quality. Click my overlay on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to brush all the way around this hippo. Broad brush strokes, you can make your brush really big, and you can just actually overlap a little bit here. Alternatively, what you can do, if I reset this, is you can just brush across the whole shot. So make your brush really nice and big, brush across the whole shot, because majority of the shot is what I want to affect. Then you can actually just remove or delete the part of the shot that you don't want to be affected. So holding down Alt turns this into an eraser, and we're just going to remove the sections you don't want affected by this adjustment. You could also just remove a little bit of the top here where the water isn't really that prevalent. So remove that off there. And now you can see with that overlay off, now I'm going to adjust just that one section. And what I can do here is actually bring down the temperature of the water to a point where it's looking slightly greener and bluer as opposed to brown and dull. You could also change the tint of it here, so if you wanted it a bright green you could do that, or you could just bring hints of green in, or a little hint of extra kind of purpley blue, which is actually quite nice. can see at the top here that there's a little bit of overlap where I haven't brushed. It's not a problem. You can now just brush around where you need this affected. Again, with the clarity, if I take clarity all the way down, it softens out the edges. And as I bring this up, you can see it really enhances the bubbles and the ripples of the water. So if I bring all the effects off and all the effects on, you can see it has a really, really nice effect. And that's one of my favorite things to do. It also works beautifully with reflections as well, animals drinking in a watering hole, but also just changing the color makeup of the pixels around an animal if it's slightly dull in brown water. So that's really all I have for you today on the adjustment brush. Just to reiterate the importance of actually knowing and understanding how to use size, how to use the feather, so the softness or hardness of your brush, and how to use the flow correctly so that you can be that much more creative and have that much more control over the local adjustments that you're making to your photographs. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned to the Londolozi blog for the next video on Lightroom tutorials.